Hello, this is Jim McKeith, Developer Evangelist for Embarcadero Technologies, and welcome to this Developer Skill Sprint on understanding and using FireMonkey layouts. This skill sprint works across all platforms, all languages, anywhere using Rad Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder, you can take advantage of this skill sprint. We're going to talk about how to build one form to rule them all. That's one of the key things that makes FireMonkey and FireUI so powerful, is that you can build one form that looks great on all platforms. We're going to touch on anchors, alignments, and spacing. We're mostly going to focus on layouts, and then we're going to talk about a few other related technologies in FireMonkey. So anchors are what you use to set the way a control resizes and moves around when the form changes. So it moves with the parent when the parent resizes, or resizes if it's two different opposite sides are anchored. So if top and bottom are anchored, then when the form gets taller, the control gets taller. If only top's anchored, then it just stays relative to the top. You've most likely used anchors before. Each control can have from 0 to 4 anchors. Alignment aligns the control with its parent, setting the anchor's size and position. So if you set the alignment, it overrides what you set for anchors. The alignment options have way expanded in FireMonkey compared to VCL. So you can anchor and fill along an edge with top, bottom, left, and right. Or you can fill the parent but preserve aspect ratios with the fit alignments. You have fit, fit left, and fit right. And then you can fill along one side of the parent with most bottom, most top, most left, and most right. So the difference with this one is this is the most to the left. For example, if you have something else to the left, this goes to the left beyond that. And so this gives you some ability to prioritize the alignments. You can only resize on one axis if you want to, with the vertical, vert center, horizontal, and horizontal center. Those are similar to the way client works. So client aligns it to fill the entire thing, horizontal and vertical, whereas these only work on one axis, which is kind of cool. So you also have center, which is going to be centered but not expanded. And then contents, which is kind of interesting. It's like client, except it actually fills all the contents. So if there's something else on the top, for example, client or contents will actually go under that, which is kind of interesting. And then scale will expand it as the parent scales. So a lot of great options here. You really need to experiment with these and get more familiar with them. There's the DocWiki link down at the bottom. So margins and spacings are a great way to add that little bit of space in there that makes your controls, the layout, more aesthetically pleasing, if you will. Margins is the space for the siblings. So if you put margins on a control, that's how much space that control must have between its siblings or between the edge of the control and its parent's edge. Padding, on the other hand, is the spacing for the children of that control. So if you add padding, when you put controls on that control, now all FireMonkey controls can be nested. Any controls you put inside that control once it has padding on it must be or will get spaced that far away from the edges based on the padding. So let's talk about some layouts. The flow layout, the best way I can figure out how to describe this is it's like the words in a paragraph. Okay, so as you resize the container, the controls flow to fill that container in. So this is, I think it's a really slick layout. At times in the past I wanted to do this and had to develop it myself, and so it's great to see something like this in FireMonkey. The one thing though is if you do want to have a forced break, so you see in that picture on the left there, button 6 and button 5 have space after them that could be filled by a button. You do that by putting a T flow layout break in there, and that forces a line break. So it's like a hard carriage return in a paragraph of text. So here we have a T flow layout with a bunch of buttons on it on here. Now, the way this works is as you add new controls, so add a new button here to the flow layout, it gets added to the end of the layout. And then when I resize this, that's how it goes there. So now, if you want to change the order something is, though, you just select the control and you just change its Z order. So we do this, we'll say send it back, and that put that up there on the top. Now I actually want that a little bit narrower. So let's go ahead and shrink this guy down. Boop. And I can tweak it more later. Clearly I need to mess with my alignment here on this one. Let's go ahead and make it twice as big, maybe. Okay. Anyway, you can play with this. This control here with this button with the diagonal text, that's a button with no text and a label on it. The label is parented on the button, and then I've just rotated the text on the button. Just trying to have a little fun with that one there. Let's take this, make it a little smaller. I should have tweaked that a little bit more beforehand. And let's make this taller here so I keep the... Okay. So this is an example actually of something I find that's useful with the flow layout is that I can keep this here always together. I always know this is going to be above it. I always know this is going to be the right of that edit box, no matter how this lays out. So let me run this here. And if I maximize this, which is not very exciting, and then however I resize this, etc., it just flows those all out. Now, also we mentioned that you have the flow break. So it added the flow break right here. Now, if I want to put some more buttons on here, let's see, button. Oh, it puts them on the flow break. Haha. Because the flow break is a layout, and so it gets those added to it. All right, so let's scroll up here and put the one there. Okay, so you see now they are broken there. So there's a gap as I resize this. And so you can use lots of flow breaks there. And the same thing with flow breaks, if you want to change the Z order, you just select the flow break and then use control bring to front, move to back type situation. So there you go. That's the big thing with the flow layout. Very useful if you're going to have controls that you want to just flow into the space, like I said, like text in a paragraph. Grid layout is really useful if you want to have a grid of controls like you see here. So the way grid layout works is you set on the layout the item width and item height, and then all the controls you place on there will have that item width and item height. Now, if you notice the second image down at the bottom, you see some things at different sizes, and that's because those controls have margins specified. So by specifying a margin, then it shrinks it down to fit within the margins. So you see there, the margins are set to fill the rest of that space up. So then as you resize the container, then the way the controls fit in there changes. So now we've got a grid layout down here. Now at first blush, when I resize this, you see it flows like a flow control does. But the difference is the grid layout is I can't resize these individual controls. I can try to, but nothing happens. If you want to change the size of the controls, you come over here and find where it says item height and item width, and you change this. So we can change this to 50 and make this a little smaller, or we can change it to 80 and make them all bigger. Okay, now you notice there's one here that is a different size than the rest of them, and that is done by setting the margins on it. So there's the margins are set on this guy here. So there's the grid layout. It behaves the same way when I run it as at design time when I resize the container that it's in. So when you want to have a lot of controls that are all the same size, grid layout's the way to go. Now it's different than the grid panel layout. The grid panel layout, you create a grid, okay, and then each control you set the width, height, align, and anchors of those controls. And then you can then place those controls in the cells that are created of that grid. Okay, so you don't specify the size of or the location of the controls. You instead specify which cells they belong into, but you then instead specify the sizes. So it's a little more flexible for being able to customize the behavior of the controls than the grid layout. Also, as you see here, the controls can span multiple cells. So let's take a look at the grid panel layout. We'll go ahead and align it to client. Now, the way the grid panel layout works is you notice we have a grid. We have 2 columns and 2 rows, so 4. And here's we have collections here. There's a column collection and a row collection. That's what we're going to look at first. Column collection, row collection. And we'll go ahead and add a new row. Now, right now, the rows are set to percentages, and they're set to each 50. Now, if I add a new row, it's going to set the value to 0 because it always makes sure these add up to be 100. Now, if I want to make this one, if I want to divide it 30% each way, then I have to, I can set it to like 60%. And what's going to happen is I'm going to go through and do some automatic adjustment here. I found if you just set it to 33 a few times, pretty soon it gets pretty close because it keeps auto adjusting that. And you can go and modify the other ones or do it different ways. That's what I usually do. Find whatever method works best for you though. So now you notice we have 3 rows and 2 columns. Now when I add a control here, it automatically puts it in the first cell, and add another control, puts it in the second cell, add another control, puts it in the third cell. Now, if we want to move the controls around, there is a collection, control collection. There we go. So here's the 3 buttons I put down here. And I can come to these and I can say, oh, let's take button 3 and let's make it span 2 columns. And now button 3 spans 2 columns. Or I can put it into row 3. Yeah, I can't put it in row 3 because there's not that many rows. Row 2. So 0, 1, 2. So that's how you move the controls around within the grid layout. So that's what all there is to it. Grid layout, you still come in here, you can still set the size of these. So I can say, or I can set it here. Oops, I'm having trouble with my mouse. There we go. Make it bigger. So you can still do all that stuff. You still control the individual controls, but the position is controlled by the grid panel layout. And then the control collection is how you can tweak that. So the scaled layout, at first, I think is not very useful because if you see there, you have this stretched, distorted controls here because these controls are placed in a scaled layout and the scaled layout was stretched and you get this distorted view. That's not very useful. I don't like that distorted. It doesn't look good to me. There might be a situation where you do want that though, so that could be useful. But if you set the align of the scaled layout to fit, it maintains the aspect ratio. And so by doing that, then you can have it stretch and it will grow according to the aspect ratio, which I think is way more useful. So it's important that you, when using these layouts, you get a real good understanding of them so that you can use them in the way you'd expected. Because when I first wanted to use scaled layout, I wanted to maintain aspect ratio and it didn't. But by setting align to fit, it does maintain aspect ratio. So now we've got down a scaled layout. Now, at the design time, it doesn't do anything interesting. It behaves like a regular layout. But at runtime, when I run this, when you resize the scaled layout, so it's set to client right now, it scales the contents. Now, when you notice that if I don't scale this proportionally, we get some kind of odd looking drawing there because it's stretching it out. I don't like the stretching it out. There might be a situation you like the stretching it out. There you go. You can do it that way. But if you change the alignment of it from client to fit, then when you scale it, notice it always maintains the aspect ratio. And so it looks kind of funky. These things still work. Hello. At such a large size, but they do. Now, usually if you're making a user interface that you want to adapt to different screen sizes, scaling up your user interface elements is not the best way to go. You want to create a user interface that adapts dynamically to the different sizes. So you don't want, that's not a very exciting form, that's that huge with such big buttons. There may be situations when you do want to do that though, and it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And so it's great that you have the flexibility to be able to deal with this if that's what you need in that situation. So there you go, that's the scaled layout. Scroll box. I think this is a layout still. It's not called a layout, so maybe you wouldn't call it a layout. But what it does is it allows you to put it in on another control, on another layout, for example, and then it allows the child controls placed in the scroll box to take up more space than the parent does. So it's like turns it into a TARDIS, if you will. It's big on the inside. So you put the scroll box down, and then I usually would align it to client, anchor it to client, so it's filling the entire space of the parent. And then you put new children controls in it, and only align those to the top and left. If you align them otherwise, it gets really funky. At least that's been my experience. You might find something that works differently, but be warned, if you go beyond top and left, it might not behave as expected. And then what happens is the user can scroll to see the additional children. So there's a few variations on the scroll box. The regular scroll box controls both vertically and horizontally, but then we also have the T-vert scroll box, horizontal scroll box, and framed versions of those as well. Tab control is really useful because it allows you to have multiple layouts that overlap each other, and then the user can transition between those using the tab controls. Now you can set the tab position to none, and it hides the navigation, and then you can manually control which tab's visible. And you also have the ability to use animations, which is kind of cool as well. Frames give you the ability to create reusable user interface elements. And these are not just the controls, but actually the code behind the controls. So basically you're creating an entire form, if you will, but then setting it aside and being able to reuse it later. So this is really useful if you want to have the same controls on multiple places. Maybe you want to have the idea of a user, an address edited, right? So it's going to have different components to go together, make an address, like the street and state, name, whatever you want to put in there. And so you can have all that there, all the code to validate it, and then reuse that in multiple places. But the other places shows up useful is that you can have the frames put together in different ways for different layouts. So for example, you can use a tab control for a form or side by side for a tablet. But an even more flexible option is the MultiView. MultiView is fairly recent. MultiView is one super panel, multiple modes. So it has different modes you see here, and there's examples over there on the right. The platform default mode, though, when you choose that one, it looks at the screen size and orientation and then chooses the mode that fits best for that. You can also use the custom mode to create your own user-defined layout and behavior. So very, very powerful, very flexible. I love the drawer layout and the new navigation panel, which is the one you see on the top or to the lower right-hand side there, that expands to be like a full drawer and then collapses to just being like a toolbar down the left or right-hand side. Very powerful, very flexible. Really need to take advantage of this in your application development. For more information, here are all the learning resources, all the links you've seen along here, along with a couple Code Rage video replays by Serena DuPont. She does a great job showing how to use some of these. She comes at it from a more design point of view, which is great. I come at it from a more technical, how do you do this point of view? So go there to get a better understanding of how to put all these pieces together and make a really awesome user interface. The most important link, though, is the one you've seen down at the bottom all the way through, is sprint-fmx-layouts. And that links to all of these here as well. So tune in next Tuesday, for developing IDE plugins for RAD Studio. This is going to be a great one. Quick introduction to developing IDE plugins. It'll be Tuesday, the 26th of December, and this one's only be available in Object Pascal because of the proximity to Christmas holiday. These offers are only available for a limited time. All registered users of previous versions qualify for upgrade pricing when upgrading to RAD Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder 10 Seattle. That's a savings of up to 45% off the new user price. Additionally, all 10 Seattle registered users get the bonus pack, which includes the MITA Converter Basic. It handles the heavy lifting when converting your existing VCL applications into FireMonkey applications, so you can take advantage of the FireMonkey framework and multi-device development. And the Premium Style Pack. This includes premium styles for VCL and FireMonkey to give your applications a premium look and feel on every platform. Also, as a special limited offer, if you buy or upgrade to Professional, Enterprise, or Ultimate, you get the Konopka Signature VCL controls and CodeSight Studio 5 for free. This collection of components and debugging tools will rocket your apps to new heights. And if you upgrade to Architect, you get the entire RAD solution pack for free. This gives you every component and tool you need to make your application great. For more information on these offers and more, visit Embarcadero.com/rad offer. Okay, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for joining us, and now we will do our live Q&A.
Thanks for joining us this morning. Is it possible to only allow resizing of the form with height and ratios fixed of the form itself? I don't think so. Let me look. If there is I
don't know if there's a fixed for a form. You can always set the client height and client width, either in a form create, for example, or just set it at design time.
Yes, I don't see a way to do that from the control point of view, but you can use the onResize event and then use a board. So you can check what the width and height is, and then use a board in order to prevent it from going to a ratio you don't want it to be. So yeah, you have to do it in code. So if you do want your scaled components to be scaled to proportionally, use fit instead. And so what will happen is if your form gets too tall, then it will just stretch out taller, and you have little gaps at the top and bottom, or gaps on the left and right. So then your form can be whatever size it needs to be, but then the components all maintain the right aspect ratio. So that's not exactly what you're wanting for if you don't want to have those gaps in the top and bottom, but you can do that through the on-right size event and just use a abort in there if the size gets to something you don't want it to be. Hopefully this was enough information for you to start using some of these other layout options available in FireMonkey. There's a lot more options there and a lot you can do, so it's a great resource available to you here. Can you not use a scaled layout assigned to the client to fill the form, and then it will be resized when the form is processed? Right, that's what I was saying, Roger. If you just use a scaled layout assigned to client on the form, and then if you assign it to client, then it will fill the form, which will stretch it without maintaining aspect ratio of the components on it. But if you set it to fit, then it will fill the form as best it can while maintaining an aspect ratio. Actually, here I can just show right now. So you should see my IDE right now.
Yes, I do.
And so let me run this. So what this has right now is it has a scaled layout. The alignment is set to fit. And so when I run this, it always maintains the aspect ratio. So, if you resize it in a way that doesn't maintain aspect ratio, you get this gap, essentially, above and below the components that have been stretched. Now, see, these aren't stretched because they're not on the alignment, or not on the layout. So one thing I had a question about before is if the controls in the font are being stretched, or if they're being drawn at a larger size. So if you notice here, these are not getting pixelated. The font still looks smooth, and that's because it's going with the larger font. It's not just doing bitmap stretching on this, because there's way more information on this curve here than there would have been in the small one. Now, I did notice that as far as the controls go, it varies based on the control. So some, or not the control, it varies based on the style you're using. So it depends on if the style or not has the information to draw at the higher sizes. So in this case here, this style I'm using does. I tried the transparent style. It doesn't look, the checkbox starts to look a little grainy when you stretch it out really big. So it depends on your style, and you might, your style, then you can customize that style or use a different style for sure. It took me a while to get used to using these new layouts and the new alignment options available in FireMonkey, but now that I've started using them, I just find them really indispensable, and they're just so valuable in being able to get the form laid out the way I want without having to go and add additional code. Brian's asking to explain or elaborate on the details of how you would move a control from, for example, position 8 to position 3 in the flow controls. So the flow control have all the controls. They're in the order that you put them on there, but occasionally want to reorder them. So the best way I found to do this is you select the control that's in position 8 that you want to move to 3, and you right-click on it and say move, or let's see, let me get the exact. So you right-click on it and go to Control, Bring to Front, and that brings it all the way to, actually, oh, I'm sorry, it's going to be Control, Send to Back. And so Send to Back puts it up at the top in the upper left-hand corner, and then you select the controls that you want to move past it. So controls, the other two controls, and you right-click on it, and you say Control, Send to Back, and then that moves those past it. And it looks like you put a link on there, David, that explains it better than I did, or the same thing?
No, I just, you were, this was just to flow layout component itself.
Oh, yes, okay. Hopefully this was some good information here to get everybody more familiar with these new layout controls and how to take advantage of them in their development. Occasionally you'll get someone to say, well, which one should I use? It's like, well, it depends on what you're trying to do. So really it's a matter of becoming more familiar with these controls, which hopefully we've done today, and then when you're building your user interface and you're like, I need it to do this, and say, oh, that would be a flow control. That would be a, I'd put a scaled layout on there with the set to fit or something like that, and then you'd get the behavior you want without writing a lot of code. So many of the stuff I've seen in these new layouts and such, I've written code for in the past to get that exact same behavior. It's so nice to be able to have, just set a couple properties, drop a new control down there, and get exactly what I'm looking for.